Welcome everyone. If you follow this channel, then you know that I built this scrapwood storage shelf about a year ago, and as you can see, it is bursting full. But that's not all of it. I still have piles of scrapwood everywhere, tucked in corners, on the walls, under the ceiling, and even outside. As a follower, you probably also know that I abused our kitchen table as an assembly and varnishing table in almost every video. Now, after 10 years of doing that, the surface is completely scratched up, full of varnish strips, the edges are worn to hell, and the veneer starts to delaminate in some spots. So here's the plan. It is time to get rid of this table as a kitchen table. I will keep it as a work table somewhere else. But as a woodworker, this is an embarrassing mess and it has to end. So we are going to build a new table, but I set myself the challenge of using scrapwood only. Basically, I'm trying to hit two birds with one stone by solving my table disaster and getting rid of scrapwood at the same time. Alright, now let's get to work. To start this off, I'm going to use this pile of Douglas fir to build the table legs. This came from a renovation project of a local church, and I believe those strips have been part of a railing. They do have an unusual crosscut profile, so the first step is to square them up on a table saw. And then I laminated 3 pieces together to increase the thickness and stability. The planer made it really easy to clean up excess glue, and it left a nice smooth surface before I cut them to the final length on a miter saw. I actually used a 96-degree angle instead of 90 degrees to give the table a little bit more of an interesting look. Now, for the same reason, I decided to give them a taper, and to make that long tapered cut, I just slammed together a simple jig from scrapwood. I want to be able to adjust the height of the table in case the floor surface is uneven, and for that I made this little drill guide. It just helps to drill holes with a consistent angle and depth. You will see in a minute what I need those holes for. I don't like sharp edges on furniture, so I used a 3/8 of an inch roundover bit on all 4 edges and some sanding by hand to break the edges on the bottom. Because this is reclaimed lumber, it has nail and screw holes everywhere, so I spent the time to fill them with sawdust and glue before sanding them. Next, I stained them black and finished them with oil-based polyurethane. This is actually a good opportunity to use up some scrap steel as well. I need a way to mount those legs, and this 1/4 inch thick steel plate is going to work just fine for that. A series of holes will allow to screw the plate to the legs as well as to the underside of the table. Okay, now you can see why I needed the holes at the bottom. They accept the threaded barrel of a T-nut. I like to pre-drill for the spurs before I hammer them in. I also used 5-minute epoxy, which helps to seat them properly and to secure them permanently. I know you can buy threaded table feet in every hardware store, but I wanted to save time and money, so I decided to simply use carriage bolts instead. I had to grind off the rounded head though, this way I could stick on cork pads to prevent scratching the floor in the future. I still had plenty of Douglas fir left. I figured this would be good material to build the framework for the tabletop, so I kept gluing parts together until I reached the needed dimensions. Quite often I sandwiched a sturdy level in between just to help keep things as straight as possible. Okay, so far so good. I used up all the Douglas fir and a whole bunch of leftover plywood. For the actual table surface, I would love to use those oak strips. I have a whole bunch of them. They also came from the church renovation project. They have been part of those little boxes behind the pews where you can put in your Bible. Now let's hope I can give this material a second life in my table project. I just cut them to length and then I used hot glue to put them in place. I know what you're thinking, don't worry, the hot glue is just a temporary solution, but it works perfectly to place those strips quickly. I left about 1/8 of an inch gap between them. The permanent solution here is epoxy. I used the West System epoxy just because I had it already at home, and I tinted the mixture black before I started pouring it into all those gaps. Now this took much more than I expected. I had to repeat the process 4 times. The epoxy just kept sinking away. The hot glue left a decent sized gap between the plywood and the strip, so there was more volume to fill than what meets the eye. At the end here I used a torch just to pop some of the bubbles that came up, and then I covered the whole thing with tarp and I placed an electric heater right underneath. At night it's still around 0 degrees Celsius in my neck of the woods, but the epoxy needs at least 15 degrees to cure, so this way I could keep the heat where it was needed. I debated for a while if I should use a belt sander or the corded hand planer to flatten the surface. I eventually decided to use the planer, which turned out to be a good choice. I was worried the hand planer would struggle with the epoxy, but it did just fine on the shallowest setting. Now after that I spent a couple hours sanding the whole thing with different grits, my least favorite part, and then I fixed some of the bubble holes with tinted Bondo. As I said earlier, I'm not a big fan of sharp edges, so I used the chamfer router bit to break the edges quite generously. Now this might be the point where I lose some of my viewers. I'm using the router here to cut out a little pocket for a wireless charging pad. I know, everyone hates it when people bring their phone to the dinner table, but think about it this way. It's like putting your phone on a designated spot where it would be too awkward to actually use it. So in a way, this encourages you to pay attention to the people and the food around you instead of your phone. Besides that, to 90%, this table will not be used as a dinner table, but as an office space instead. Not only by us, but also by our summer guests, usually young students from all over the world, and all of them seem to have not only phones, of course, but also wireless earbuds, smartwatches, fitness trackers, and much more. The product list of items that can be charged wireless keeps growing rapidly. It's just part of modern living by now. You might have noticed how the black epoxy was bleeding into the wood. That didn't come as a surprise. Red oak is very porous. Luckily this is not a big deal in my case, since I was going to stain the surface anyways. I know this looks like using black epoxy was pointless, but wait until I remove all the excess stain. All the black lines become visible again, and the beautiful grain pattern of the wood is revealed as well. To cover the big opening in the center, I'm using a 1/4 inch thick tempered glass panel. I bought a couple of those years ago for 50% off. They're actually meant for a glass railing on a deck. That means the size is standard and would be very easy to replace if this one ever breaks. I don't feel comfortable though to place weight right in the center of the panel without any support. Now I could make an entire 20-minute video just of how I built the decorative center support, but for the sake of the video length, I will try to keep it short. Yet again, I try to use only materials that I had already in the shop, and since it will be visible through the glass, those materials had to be nice looking, well, at least to me. You don't need me to comment every step here, but I will give you a couple keywords. Old shiny shower curtain rod, scrap piece of walnut, and parts of a broken transmission. Here we go. Alright, so here's the final result. I built 2 shallow drawers off camera, one on each end of the table. The 2 wireless charging pads fit perfectly in the pockets that I cut out earlier with the router, and they are completely flush with the table surface. All the electrical accessories are powered by a removable battery bank that is tucked away under the table. I just didn't feel like tripping over a cable non-stop. I'd rather take out and plug in the battery bank every once in a while. Those gears, needle bearings and friction plates came from an old broken Toyota Sienna transmission that I took apart years ago, and to me those parts are not only perfectly machined, but also quite beautiful. I couldn't get myself to throw them away. This might be a bit weird to some people, but what can I say, I'm an odd guy, and I think those parts deserve a second life. Last but not least, the white puck in the center under the glass panel that is held by a big piece of black walnut and a recycled shower curtain rod is actually a touch sensor that can control LED lights. This really elevates the look of the entire centerpiece, and the color can be changed remotely as well. This table was weeks of work, definitely the most complicated table I ever built, but totally worth it. Shout out to Gary at this point who hooked me up with most of the wood. Thank you again. And thank you guys for sticking with me and making it all the way to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, I will see you on the next one.